Good afternoon, everyone joining, or almost good afternoon, 1 minute shy. We will give a couple minutes to let others join. We have a good number of people attending today, so just sit tight for 1 minute and then we'll get started. Again, we're going to get started in just a minute. It's just 12 o'clock now. Say we have roughly half of our registered attendees in, so just give everybody 1 more minute to grab their lunch and sit down and relax for an hour. All right. I'm going to get started. I will do a brief intro, which will give some time for more folks to join us here today, and then we'll jump into the main event. Thank you all for joining us today at this Westchester Municipal Planning Federation Lunch and Learn for June 11th, 2026. Today's topic is the Mount Vernon Comprehensive Plan. My name is Kevin Kane. I'm a director at large with the Westchester Municipal Planning Federation, or WMF as we call it, which most of you probably know, and I'm moderating today's session. We're joined by fellow WMF board members today, including our president, Linda Whitehead, second vice president, Robin Steinberg, who is also providing technical assistance today. Thank you, Robin. We also have Valerie Menastra, Lee Elman, Jaime Martinez, Peter Fro, and Pat Cleary, who is also part of the discussion today. WMF is a voluntary association of officials created to further the exchange of information on matters of planning interest. We have a variety of events like this throughout the year. If anyone part of the meeting today is not a member, please consider joining. You can find more information at wmpf.org, where you can also sign up for our mailing list if you're not already receiving our emails. And I promise we do not spam all the emails that you get. The handful that you get throughout the year are all good and helpful. For members joining today that are part of the American Institute of Certified Planners, you can claim 1 hour of credit for this session today. So today we're joined by James Rouse and Patrick Cleary. Pat is a professional planner with over 37 years of experience. He serves as the principal of Clear Consulting, a planning firm established in 1990 with offices in Northport, New York. Prior to the formation of Cleary Consulting, Pat served as a staff member for communities in Westchester and Long Island, and also worked for other private consulting firms. James is the Commissioner of Planning and Community Development for the City of Mount Vernon, a position that he has held since 2022. Prior to Mount Vernon, James worked in the office of the Bronx Borough President for many years, including when he served as the Director of Planning and Development from 2016 to 2022. I do want to note that from 2012 to 2016, James served as the president of the American Planning Association's New York Metro chapter. Shortly after that, in 2018, I had the pleasure of working with James. I don't know if you remember this, James, but we worked together as part of the Anchor Opportunity Network Working Group, which was an initiative through the Regional Plan Association. So that's how I first got to know him.
Good. Mhm.
James spearheaded the city of Mount Vernon's first comprehensive plan since 1968, so naturally much had changed since that time, and a new plan was sorely needed. The plan just last week received a Planning Achievement Award at the annual WUMF Award ceremony. Just want to add on a personal note, I was actually born at Mount Vernon Hospital, though I never lived there. Many of my relatives did, and my father was even in the first graduating class of the new high school building in 1964. Years later, in the early 90s, I used to skateboard at the Lincoln Elementary School, but they took away all the cool stuff we used to skate there. And we weren't supposed to be skating there. That's probably why they took it away. But fortunately, many years later, there is actually a new skate park at Memorial Field, which is part of a larger, wonderful facility that was given an award by WUMF in 2025. So at this time, I'm going to hand it over to James, and he will run through his presentation with support from Pat. And once they're done, we'll be happy to respond to any questions that you have, which you can submit through the Q&A function. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to James.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you everyone for attending. I'm excited to be here to talk about our comprehensive plan and the process that it took to get from point A to point B. Having it there, probably advance. There we go. So this is our cover slide. So City of Mount Vernon, nicknamed Jewel of Westchester. I keep this up because it's real important to our history. 1853, we were established along as part of the town of Eastchester. And in 1892, we separated as the city of Mount Vernon and have grown since then. As Kevin mentioned, James Rouse, Commissioner of Planning Community Development, Patrick Cleary, Principal of Cleary Consulting, who became the lead consultant for the comprehensive plan halfway through the process, and that's how that came about will be part of our discussion today. So, in terms of how this is going to run today, I'm going to do my best to breeze through these slides and try to give an overview, mostly of the process and the overall components of the plan. We're going to leave more details and nuances of the comprehensive plan for questions that Kevin or any of you participants may have, because we just kind of want to give you just kind of the at first speak to just the overall environment, talk about some obstacles and opportunities that were there, and how at the end of the day we got to yes. So those of you who are not really familiar with Mount Vernon, on paper, we're a city of 74,000 residents as of the last census. Really, with people not reporting, we're closer to 80, between 80 and 85,000. We are the second densest city in New York State after New York City, with over 16,000 people per square mile. We're 4.4 square miles. And we're the sixth densest municipality in all of New York State, because some of the smaller villages in Rockland, like Kaiser Village, are a little denser and increasing in density. We have, in our 4.4 square miles, we have almost 31,000 housing units, which is, is a lot, but about 31% of them are single family homes. Mount Vernon is mostly made up of single family homes and multifamily apartment buildings in terms of the actual units. Not a lot of in the middle 2 to 4 family homes that are there. So it's kind of very suburban or a little more urban, particularly around our downtown. Some just demographic information. We're mostly female household, increasingly aging household. There is a bit of brain drain that does happen here that we're part of the comprehensive plan is to address that. We are also the blackest and brownest community north of the Mason-Dixon line, with almost 84% of our population being either Black, Hispanic, or Latino. So
James, I just wanted to
that,
jump in real quick, just to touch base on the housing component of the community. So James sort of breezed over that a little bit. I think it's really important to bear in mind that one of the fundamental elements of this plan, which translates to really any plan, was understanding the diversity of the housing stock in a community. Once we started to look at this community, it was very clear that there was not a fits all solution to the housing challenges the city faced. And if you look at the housing in the city, there's stately old homes, there's planned communities from the 1920s, there's McKim, Mead, and White condominium complexes that was sort of one of the first in the nation, mid-century suburban sprawl. 22-story high-rise buildings, really, really diverse. So right out of the box and thinking about how to plan for the future, understanding how the community got to where it was a critical component of the comp plan exercise. So one of the elements in sort of looking at your community's comprehensive plan is really understanding sort of the characteristics of everything. But those housing characteristics that people seem to short shrift is really something it's important, and you really need to dig deep into addressing that.
no, I'm glad you brought that up, Pat. I wish I included a graphic on it. Mount Vernon, unfortunately has had, a stigma for a while, and that's largely a product of where we are geographically located in Westchester County, one of the wealthiest counties in the country. So a lot of people are surprised to learn, whether just through word of mouth or actually driving through Mount Vernon, that it's primarily a middle class, upper middle class community. Yes, there are, a few mansion style homes at the north end near Bronxville and Eastchester, but it's primarily middle class and upper middle class. And when you come to our downtown, just the northern part of South Side, and you drive along Sanford Boulevard, which is where most people interact with Mount Vernon, aside from the train stations, you don't immediately see that. But we really truly are, as Pat said, a diverse community, both in terms of our housing stock, geographically and culturally. And one thing I wanted us to do as part of the comp plan, and it guided our approach, I wish I had a graphic for this, is, I kind of approached it from like a triangular perspective, in the sense that, we have the city of Mount Vernon, that it is a suburb of New York City, but we kind of function as a typical Westchester village. And when we speak to different people, they all have different views among that. So like within that triangle, where do we exactly fit? There is no one size fits all. We're not New Rochelle. We're not Chappaqua. We're not, Portchester. We're the city of Mount Vernon, but there's a lot of elements and components to what that means, and we really tried to tackle that. We're the most connected community in Westchester County, along with Yonkers in terms of Metro North stations. We have 3 Metro North stations within our boundaries, and access to 3 additional, Wakefield in the Bronx, Bronxville, and Pelham for folks who live along the border there. And we are in walking distance of 2 New York City subway termini. On top of that, we are wedged between the Bronx River and Hutchinson River Parkways and bisected by Cross County Parkway. So our access to transportation is fantastic. Our options are great. We have a ton of B-Line bus service here, a lot of which terminates at Petrillo Plaza, just a little east of City Hall here. And interestingly enough, we still maintain a vibrant industrial district. I don't know if people can see my cursor, but really in the southeast section here is not a residual industrial sector. It's still very active, even though it's being looked at for brownfield opportunity area. It is fairly robust, which is something that you don't really find in the Northeast. And it's useful, it's helpful for us because, a lot of our property tax revenue comes from those businesses. So, people are doing business in Mount Vernon. And just again, our access in New York City brings us additional opportunities that a lot of other cities or a lot of small towns in other regions do not really have the advantage of having access to.
And James, I just want to touch on that industrial base too, because one of the things when you start analyzing a community, you start to learn about a community. So, like James indicated, I was unaware of the depth of the city's industrial base, but we made an effort to reach out to that community so that we could get their input. And for example, one of the or several of those industrial uses rely on barge traffic up the river to support their industrial. Who would have known that there is a waterfront with respect to Mount Vernon that's industrial oriented and a significant driver of the local community? Never would have known it. And these are the things you learn when you start doing that outreach into communities. So there's two levels of outreach, which James will talk about in a minute, but it's sitting down and talking to people and just doing the nitty-gritty work that planners do of driving down every street, looking at the land uses, inventorying things, and you start to put these pieces together. And again, just illustrates fascinating examples of communities that no one ever knew exist, or many of us didn't know existed.
Yeah, and that's part of the history of Mount Vernon. We were um, we were founded as the city of homes in 1892, city of happy homes, and it was one of the country's first planned communities. And the idea was to create a municipality that was diverse. It allowed for all Americans to have opportunities. Admittedly, it was still segregated in many ways, but within the municipal boundaries, pretty much anyone could, you know, buy their first home in Mount Vernon. And there's a lot of history in Mount Vernon. A lot of Revolutionary War era history has taken place here. St. Paul's historic church and cemetery down in our industrial area. Over here, a lot of people associate, us residually like with hip hop and money earned in Mount Vernon, but there's a lot of culture and in art here and Denzel Washington. There's a lot of culture and art that came out of here and folks who have lived here for brief periods or long periods of time. Betty Shabazz, Malcolm X's wife. There's a surprising history that a lot of folks don't know about. And so we wanted to capture that history, and it became integral, particularly from our now judge and former city council president Daniel Brown, was just like we need to emphasize the history because that's not something that we do great either in our actual cultural history or landmarking. So that's something that the comp plan allows for.
And again, just an illustration of what a good comp plan does. So it peels back those physical layers of the community in terms of land use, but those cultural layers as well. And once you start digging into that, you start to begin to make connections. So we'll talk about that in a
Yeah, so we decided to do our first comp plan in 57 years, which, we would get a lot of wows when we'd say that. It's like, yes, but, we're not the only municipality that has gone that long without a comprehensive plan. I always say New York City never adopted one. The first, city that adopted zoning, full-on zoning ordinance, never adopted a comprehensive plan. So it's not unheard of. It's not founded. But there was a desperate need for a comprehensive plan, not just because we needed to update it in general, but we were really hit hard by COVID-19, and you can see that in our downtown. South Fourth Avenue, Gramerton Avenue, Lower Gramerton Avenue, which are technically separate commercial districts, but really one core spine. Still has a lot of robust businesses, but a lot of businesses closed, and we found that all over the country. But we were in the midst of both a financial and political crisis at the time. I know that's very well documented in various ways. We're still completing audits from a few years back to get us back on our feet. I know we had 4 mayors in one year in 2019, but surprisingly, with COVID, brought some level of stability, and there was just some urgency that we need to do something. We can't let COVID beat us. We can't let our politics beat us. We can't let our financial situation beat us. And so, the priority, I came aboard in 2022. So, walking through the door, there was huge urgency and a huge need universally feeling that we need a comprehensive plan here. Spot zoning and pay to play was historically the norm. If you drive throughout Mount Vernon, you kind of see that. You'll see, a 13-story building next to a one-family house that just seems um, strangely placed. And that's not unheard of, but how things got built, how it's, we'll give $100,000 to this program if you allow for this, for us to build 10 stories more than we should. And so it's saying like, if we're going to build like this, we have to know where to build and we have to know why we're doing it. And we have to have some parameters around it. And so, one major goal was to hone that energy and hone that focus. Because even during COVID and post-COVID, there was development pressure, but we saw that as opportunity. And that's something the comprehensive plan needed to address. And while we wanted to address that, again, the city of happy homes, we have to maintain the character and integrity of our neighborhoods. And, while allowing for certain nodes, and I emphasize that, nodes to allow for growth, because the growth that was happening was, kind of, un, you know, people weren't really watching over it.
So, James, let me ask a question. So, when you were thinking about how to manage this exercise
Mhm.
and you were emerging from COVID, you realized the crisis in the community. There was historically all these issues you were dealing with, yet there was still development interest in the community. How were you able to advance a comprehensive plan and still maintain those developers on the hook that still wanted to invest in the community without stopping everything entirely and putting a moratorium in place and so forth?
So there are a couple of things, and my apologies, any city council member who may be on this, but something that when I walked through the door was interesting was that a few of our city council members ran on a platform of, no development until, well, not an official moratorium, but kind of the policy was no development until we get the comp plan done. And I was like, oh, really? I was like, well, don't you find that a little handcuffing? And they were like, yeah, well, in like 9 months from now, after we get the comp plan done. And I was like, hold up. It's like, we're talking easily 18 to 24 months here. And they were like, what? And so we had to scramble a little bit. And so that kind of guided, our approach here. And I'll get into that more, was that um, we maintain developer interest by saying, look, we're doing a comp plan, just stick with us. Depending on where you're interested in, we will, there will be opportunity there. Mount Vernon is not a place that has historically moves fast with things. So we would just tell folks like, hey, we know you're already held up on this project and buildings department. So like, if you just work with us, give us time, be part of the conversation, then we can get things done. That doesn't mean nothing happened. We still have land use boards, we still have projects, we still have site plan alterations that were there and variances to give. So as long as you were doing as of right, but if you needed a or if you needed a variance, then we were still building. We weren't saying no to everything. It was just, you know, rezonings, large scale new construction, kind of large scale development plans. We just had to put pause on them. And the reason was like, we had to get through this because this, there was an urgency, there was a desire. As I mentioned, 1968 was the last comprehensive plan, and there were multiple attempts over the years to adopt a new one. And they just unfortunately weren't able to get anywhere. Last attempt, between 2009 and 2011, I saw Frank Fish, who's one of the participants, BFJ Planning, led that, but there was a change in leadership. And what often happens is people want progress for their city, but sometimes politicians was like, that progress should come from me, not from the other person. And so unfortunately, even though over 90% of the way through the process, when leadership changed, put on the shelf somewhere. It did help advise us to a good degree for this comprehensive plan, but we were living in a post-COVID world, and so things had definitely changed since that plan was not adopted. But I said there was an urgency. City council, they declared lead agency on the process, so they would definitely had a very strong hand in how the plan was executed. Like we were allowed as a department to, work with our consultant team and such. But they definitely were very, very active. I mean, it's, I'll get to it's one reason like why Pat is here. Pat is on retainer with our city council for land use matters. And so they just wanted to make sure that like we get it done and we get it done right this time. So we released the RFP in 2022, and our first phase began in 2023, which I'll talk about our approach right now. So because of a lot of what I discussed right there, in terms of the urgency, the financial crisis, political crisis, coming out of COVID, and just wanting to see something positive. And what Pat was asking about, how do you maintain developer interest? Well, a lot of developer interest was downtown. And why was it downtown? Because Pat actually worked on a TOD, Transit-Oriented Development, near the Mount Vernon West train station. And everyone's asking, what are you doing about Mount Vernon East? What are you doing about downtown? I'm looking at property. I bought a property down there. I want to move. And we kept telling folks like, we still haven't come out of COVID. So there's time, number one, and number two, if we're going to do something, we got to, do it right. We got to do it based on something, not just, solely a developer's vision, like people dictating to us, like we would more dictate what, what we would want to see. So we focused on the 50 block area of downtown, that centered around City Hall, Mount Vernon Hospital, the Gramerton, South Fourth Avenue Spine, and Mount Vernon East. And we actually added to that like East Third Street, which is, historically one of our more struggling stretches of street that has, a very vibrant storied past, but we included it to, spawn, some development along that corridor. So in order to take advantage of that interest, as well as, get community buy-in for it, we were just like, all right, let's do this. Let's do it in steps, and let's make sure that, everyone has a level of trust where we feel that, this is a thing that's happening. It's a thing that we can get done. We could get done.
And
And phase
James, I
two,
just want to jump in there. The reason that was a successful exercise is because the work that was being done in this incremental process was being done transparently. So the results of studies, the results of analyses were being made publicly available. So those developers who were interested in the community could see, there's a thought of an adjustment in a particular area. We can sort of start bringing that into our development plans so that when things get adopted, we're there with a conforming or an appropriate project. So I think because, as James indicated, these projects take so long, the notion of being transparent and delivering material to the public is really, really beneficial for two reasons. Number one, it gets it out there. And number two, I think, James, we received a lot of feedback going through the process, which we were able to use to sort of refine our approach. And that's outside of the formal public engagement process. It's sort of an underlying process. So I think transparency becomes really critical when you're engaged in a 2-year process that involves changing stuff.
yeah, and it's important. As I mentioned, community buy-in was important for us. And, doing it this way, I said, it's not a traditional way to do it, but it's not unheard of. But as I said, to get buy-in, to get a level of trust, it was going to take longer. But I mean, there was just a reality that we had to deal with also, because, we had phase one and phase two, and then to make it a reality, we have to update our zoning ordinance. Our zoning ordinance in many ways is very arcane and not easy to read for the layperson trying to do a project in the city. And so that was just very important to us to take a different approach. And we hadn't come out of our financial crisis yet. And so paying anywhere from 600,000 to $1 million up front or more was not something we could do. And so we were deliberate. It gave us time to like really focus and think and, to build that trust. We were very community outreach heavy. I got to give it to my staff. I got to give it to my team. They rolled up their sleeves. Even, we're planning community development department, but we have staff who are, we have poor accountants who are, manage our grants. They came out, they helped with this, and we had over 30 forums of public engagement. Those are community conversations, public workshops, cohort specific sessions, public hearings. Not completely unheard of, but in a municipality like ours, having over 30 forms of public engagement is a huge thing. But it was necessary. It's necessary. We're 4.4 square miles with over 400 houses of worship. We are a diverse community. And, our geographically, there's still some mental divides, and our job is to bridge that divide. We did have an advisory committee on board. And I'll talk a little bit about that more later. It did not work out as smoothly as we had hoped, but part of the reason was that the advisory committee was formed prior to my arrival, and our city council put it together, and we had a 50-person advisory committee, which is about anywhere from 5 to 10 times greater than the normal size of an advisory committee. And we had about a dedicated, anywhere from 12 to 18 folks who showed up all the time. And that was really great. But we would have a lot of inconsistency in terms of folks coming in and out. And with our city council, they didn't really know how they wanted to leverage our advisory committee. So admittedly, even though we met on a fairly regular basis, that's one like takeaway, which I didn't write later on, is that as planners, we really need to step in more when it comes to like step up and step in more when it comes to our outreach and engagement, and that includes our advisory committee. But there was a level of political expediency and equity that they wanted to achieve that it got a little unwieldy at a certain point. But another important thing was that given the diversity, we approach our community outreach, multi-cohort, being able to address a lot of different communities. I'll talk about that in a minute. So we did get to yes eventually, but we had to pivot a lot throughout this comprehensive plan. I've talked a little bit about the politics and everything, and I said, no, Mount Vernon has a reputation. That did play out. A lot of people, frustrated, wanted to see A, wanted to see B, but that's not uncommon in any municipality. But really, an issue for us, the phase one was helpful in that it was a lot of good lessons learned. We adopted our downtown vision report, which was the phase one in January 2024. But we had to make changes in terms of, getting it done. Our consultant team was not, I said, firing on all cylinders. We had to make a drastic change between phase one and phase two because we were not really getting the feedback, the collaboration, the work product, or the help with the community outreach that was necessary. The city was we were left to our own devices there. And so we took a step back, we slowed the process down a little bit in terms of the actual work. We kept up with our community engagement while we were figuring out how to make the change. And so one thing we wanted to do is we realized we needed some continuity between phase one and phase two. We needed a new lead consultant between phase one and phase two, and we needed, no matter who it was, someone that really tackled the community outreach in partnership with the city. And so, conversations with city council, really encouraged us to, talk to Pat, who, getting that downtown vision report, executed, was difficult because the first couple of drafts we received were not up to our standard. And so Pat stepped in with myself and, our land use council, Brad Schwartz and Aaron Steinmetz, to really clean that document up. And so city council was just like, Pat really helped us out with that. Why not? Let's have a conversation with him. And so we asked Pat to really be the quarterback of our team, just really a desire to hold things together. And, he agreed. I mentioned we maintain continuity between our first and second phases. AKRF, Peter Farrow, who I know is on the session, and Hudson Valley Path for Progress worked on phase one and were willing to stay on with us after um, much discussion and just, trying to maintain that level of trust and confidence with the process of staying on. But we brought on two outreach consultants, BRS Incorporated and Creative Urban Alchemy, to focus on community outreach in general and to help us with certain cohorts because we were having a lot of problems with certain cohorts in the city. We had, I mentioned we were multi-cohort, and so we did cultural cohorts, very language focused. We did a Portuguese session, we did Spanish session, we did Haitian, the Creole sessions. We also wanted to do age cohorts, seniors, youth, like particularly youth who doesn't get a lot of opportunity to have a voice in processes like this. And also stakeholder cohorts, our business community, our retail, our industrial community. So what we discovered was that some of our cohorts were difficult to reach, and there were different reasons why. I'm working up, youth, as I mentioned, youth aren't always easy to engage, and sometimes they're an afterthought. And so we brought Creative Urban Alchemy aboard because they really have that experience with our youth, and we were able to do a lot of pop-up sessions. We had a lot of, at events, youth events in parks, being able to walk the streets, getting our youth involved to do surveys the streets, and then they would be able to tell their classmates and their friends about it. Realities dealing with that, we have very large drive-in Caribbean community, but we discovered that the Haitian community actually isn't that large and that vocal. So it's like pivoting, like, well, who in the Caribbean community do we reach out to? It's like it wasn't that hard, but we have to change our way of thinking. And surprisingly, our largest growing population is, Spanish-speaking population. We do have a Brazilian population, but we're able to reach them through our successful Portuguese sessions. Our Spanish-speaking population, we were surprised it was really hard to connect with. And it kind of befuddled us because at the time, at the commissioner level, you had four, fluent Spanish speakers, myself included, who would try to reach out, but people weren't showing up. And so we had to do three separate sessions. And so during phase two, we pivoted and really tried to figure out. And we were able to get, a handful of folks to come out. But during that, we learned that historically the Hispanic community is Dominican, but the Dominican Cultural Center burnt down. And so no one really hung out except at church or meeting up at places outside of the city. And the Hispanic population was becoming more diverse and more Central and South American. And given our political environment, number one, people didn't want to get involved because the trust of government, they might be swooped up. And also historically, it's, historically African American, Italian, Caribbean community, Afro Caribbean community. And so it wasn't as visible of a population. And so these were kind of lessons learned.
So, James, let me just jump in for a second with respect to that. So, the community engagement process was incredibly robust in Mount Vernon. There's no question about it, but it was also very challenging. And one of the sort of takeaways from doing this in your community is that an ad hoc or sort of random community engagement process is only going to be a bunch of people complaining about things. The challenge is to have people that can interpret that and turn it into policy. It's really, really, and part of that is our obligation to train people who have never participated before. I mean, there's lots of people that are the standard people that are always there and always come to public hearings. But when you do a significant outreach process, you're reaching people who've never participated in the process before. And by and large, that's the information that's really useful. But you have to train them because we speak in a very specific language. Planners have their own dialogue, their own nomenclature. Translating that into what people understand is really a challenge. So my opinion, and the public engagement task was handled by others, but having people on your team, if you're going to budget a comp plan, make sure budgeting is done for professionals to work on the engagement process because it's harder than you think. And unless you can translate all that information into actionable policies, it's kind of a waste of time. So money well spent. And I'll just illustrate one point that James touched on is Creative Urban Alchemy was reaching out to kids, and they used a portion of their budget to pay high school kids to go out and reach out into the community. You'd be surprised how effective it was when people saw their neighbor's kid knock on the door and ask for questions. They'll tell them anything as opposed to a pointy-headed planner asking a question.
Yeah.
So it's a lot that we can share a lot of experiences on how the engagement process in Mount Vernon really was remarkable and really quite successful.
That's a good point, Pat. Um, another part of pivoting was even our internal processes and the makeup of like political environment administration. We had, finally after years, an agreeable mayor and city council that wanted to, you know, not only move the comp plan forward, but just, see progress. But it was still a fraught political environment. The common phrase around here, during election season is silly season. And, it's just because you're on social media and this, that, and the other thing. But even internally, because, financially we're struggling and our approach, we had to modernize our approach. We're the planning department. We're not communications professionals or marketing professionals. But, because we were lean on certain things, it was difficult to get consistent institutional support, even though we had leadership support, because many times we're running on fumes, financially just to like get certain things or our capacity to execute. So it did, sometimes affect our messaging. We worked really hard, and that's why we pounded the pavement as much as we did. But it was hard to get, we did door hangers, we did bus ads, we did a lot of that, and there were still people who were saying, I didn't hear about this process, so not being able to have the finances or the expertise to get some form of that messaging out provided difficulty because there were naysayers out there, there were skeptics out there, who both internally like who like served on some of our boards as well as just people in the community who never participated in any session would just be, poo-pooing it or just putting things out there. I mean, there were folks who were very active parts of the process and like even advisory board committee members who were, everyone has their opinion. They were not happy with certain things, but they were participants. And like, that's not what I'm saying here. There were people who did not participate in the process who are just very, very adamant. And so it's important to generally just not listen to the noise. I mean, if there are valid points, such as like, hey, you're not reaching my community, then it's like, okay, well, we need to address that. Even though you're not participating, there's a reason. But just kind of because of politics or just because of, someone who wants to be a curmudgeon, it's important not to let that overwhelm you, because it's going to be out there. It's going to be out there. But it was difficult for us in those areas that we couldn't properly address, that's part of like a lessons learned.
And part of the challenge of a consulting team is James indicated you can't listen to the noise. Sometimes within the noise is a message James had to hear. So it was sort of our job to sift the wheat from the chaff a lot of times
Yeah.
and get what was the kernel of a message that may have been embedded in something that was destructive, clean it out, bring the point forward, and deal with it.
Yeah. So now, oops, sorry. Some of the boring stuff. Adoption. So we got through it. How did we get through it? So again, Mount Vernon City Council was lead agency. They were very hands-on in the process. But we had to put forth legislation in the form of referral letters, from the department to get that forward. The mayor herself had no formal role in the adoption process of, other than, hiring this handsome gentleman right here. But she was involved in terms of, testifying and, just, giving her input as both a resident and as a leader in the process. We wound up at the end of the day having 5 public hearings, 2 in the first phase, 3 in the second phase. We definitely made some adjustments along the way in terms of that messaging. What we heard in those public hearings. And, at the end of the day, we did secret, we did the long form EAF. You know, the reason we did that, we did get a lot of questions about that. And, we do acknowledge that, there is, pending litigation that's there regarding that. But, the last part of the process, even though they're separate processes, is, we're in the process of adopting a new zoning ordinance. We are finalizing our review of those RFPs right now, and we're going to be doing a full GEIS as part of that. So a lot of what we did with the comp plan, just put forth, the vision for the next 10 years, but also suggestions. Nothing was set in stone. Um, as we see here, this is our final product, Vision Mount Vernon, 10 years forward. We had a whole chapter on implementation. And so a number, like a lot of the comp plans had a number of points that focused on, short, medium, long term, who's going to be responsible for it. I have this slide because I said historical character of the city was very important for us. Um, you know, and we did provide a framework. And now a lot of people took this as like, whoa, well, here's your zoning, here's what you're planning on doing. And Pat was definitely a champion of this. Like, we have to make this suggested because the zoning ordinance is a whole other beast. And so we can provide guidance, and that's what this is guidance, but we can't provide hard and fast numbers what's there, but we can come up with maps of what we heard and generalize like what people want to see. We don't do actual zones, but we heard that, there's a desire for high density residential here, or to maintain the industrial character there. Our neighborhood, is definitely, and I say this intentionally, is a collection of single family homes, and we want to maintain that. And so we just kind of had a general low density area without saying like what's going to be single family, what's going to allow townhouse. We just kind of gave general definitions because the answer was in the zoning ordinance. The answer was like, what are we keeping the same? What are we doing contextually? And what are we looking for opportunities for growth for? Pat?
So it was always understood that we would be addressing seeker in this incremental manner. So the neg deck that was adopted for the comprehensive plan and all the policies in the comprehensive plan, it addresses the theoretical modifications that are in the plan. This is a higher density area. This is a lower density area. Is sewer and water available? Are there traffic issues? So all those issues were addressed, but they were addressed at a different level at the neg deck for the comp plan, knowing that when the zoning were adopted and those FARs were actually sort of set in stone, that's when the ability to formally assess the implications of the plan would come into place. So, for example, the zoning phase that what the city has issued the RFP for will require full build-out analyses within these zones based on the new zoning provisions and parameters. That's something that's a definable impact that you can analyze very, very specifically. So the notion of this seeker review was intentional. It was done specifically because we were going to deal with a neg deck and a GEIS to follow. And I think, the proof's in the pudding. The findings of that are fairly straightforward and clear. Um, so yeah, we have a process that was never we've never varied from it. It's always been intentional, and we're continuing with that process moving forward.
I
All
just
right,
want to
that's
just
it
want to
for,
jump in for one
yeah.
second as we're coming up on 12:50. I know you're in the home stretch here.
Yeah, I was gonna
Um,
say I'm gonna breeze through this now
yeah,
because
if you
I'll
could do
allow
that, and
for
then just
questions.
remind people if they have questions they want to. Hopefully, we can get to a couple of them before the hour's up at 1. So if you have any questions you want and you can put them in the Q&A function.
Yeah, so quickly, just with this slide, and I did this on purpose, like to have like the downtown mixed use and then Mount Vernon West, and you see there's a downtown mixed use area. But if you look at on the left-hand side, the suggested, FAR and heights, we're suggesting like potentially 7 different zones that range in FAR from 1.5 to 8. And so like people freak out. It's like, oh, well, you're saying you want the highest FAR and want 21 stories. It's like, no, it's like density means different things in different areas. But we recognize this is an area that could handle a more downtown type of feel. 3 or 4 stories, downtown is South Fourth and Gramerton, mostly 3 and 4 stories. That's a different type of density. But recognizing that there is a desire to have more of that in this area. So quickly, takeaways. Invest in your outreach. It makes a world of difference. It's important to hear as many voices as possible. You won't be able to hear every single voice, but do your best to try to hear as many voices as possible. Within your budget, choose best fit over lowest cost, or what I say, pizzazz. There was a desire, it was just like, oh, we need some bold-faced names, we need some up folks, but it's just like that cost. I mean that's how we went with a guy like Pat Cleary. But but we don't do lowest cost at the same time. It's like, what's the best fit for your current situation? Look at your budget, your political environment, what the city needs, like all those variables, and choose what's the best fit. It's going to be a slower process than you intended. We anticipated 18 to 24 months, and it was a little over 2.5 years. Know your community for better or for worse. Problem with, planners are an introverted community, by nature, but, get to know your community, get out there because know what's good about it, know where the obstacles are going to be. Don't be surprised. Don't be surprised for better or for worse. Be ahead. Plan for the worst, fail, plan again, rinse and repeat until it works. It's not an easy process. There's a lot of stumbling blocks, a lot of obstacles, again, a lot of naysayers. Don't allow yourself to fail. Just keep at it, pivot. Don't give up when you face adversity. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good or the necessary. And what I mean by that is just kind of like you can still get a good plan. We had a limited budget. We had to do it in a phased way, but we had to get it done. It was a necessity. We needed to do this. Just get done what you need to get done. It doesn't have to be perfect. Not everyone's going to be happy, but it's a 10-year plan. I always say it's a beginning, not an end. You can adjust along the way. You can do a zoning ordinance. You can have vision, amendments to that vision along the way. And finally, focus on the qualitative, not the quantitative. You don't have to do X amount of this or X amount of that, but the quality of it, even if it's on a smaller scale, as long as it's quality, leave your communities with something to work with, something to work from. Even I said, if it's not perfect, but just the quality of it is important.
which
Okay.
is which is what the comp plan exercise is all about. It produces a plan. That's important, but it is a process. Creating the plan is a process, but more importantly, once the plan is adopted, there continues to be a process. So in the case of Mount Vernon, there are 400 policy recommendations in the plan, something like that. It's now the job of James and the city council to adopt all of those, hopefully. That's going to take many, many years. So the process is long to create a plan. Once the plan's adopted, the continuing process lives with you for years afterwards. And stuff changes, which is why you need to not go 50 years, James, before the next adoption of a comprehensive plan. You need to look at these frequently.
Yeah, so we have 7 or 8 minutes left. Here's some links to the comp plan and that standalone downtown vision report in our website. And just, thank you for listening to us over the last, 52 minutes. And so,
Yep.
open
That
question, Kevin,
Yeah,
anyone?
yep. So I just want to, we got a couple coming in. I have a couple lined up, but I'm not gonna waste time asking my questions. Before we get to that, I just want to note something I neglected to note at the beginning of the session, that this session is actually co-sponsored by the Tappan Zee section of the Metro New York chapter of the American Planning Association. So very important, and just wanted to make sure I note that. So I'm going to get to the questions that I have so far. The first one is, what was the feedback that you received generally? Was there an aversion to high density, or was the focus more towards economic development and industrial preservation?
No, really good question. In reality, it was more balanced, but the most vocal folks had concerns about density. That was something we heard a lot. It was interesting because it's like we're not New Rochelle, we're not Yonkers, we're not White Plains, and we know what that meant. It's just kind of like no one, folks were like, we don't want a 50-story Avalon Bay or Trump building in our downtown. We know something needs to change, and we know we need density, but density meant different things to different folks. Some people, there were some people who were like, I wish it was like the Yonkers waterfront. Why can't we do that? It was just like, well, copying and pasting, brings, I won't say it brings disaster, but doesn't always bring what you necessarily desire. So we had to right fit things. To other people, it meant density meant townhomes. That's what density meant. And so trying to find the balance, and this was where the mayor was really helpful in having a conversation with her, trying to strategize. She looked at what we had, and we have some very Mitchell-Lama-esque buildings downtown, like a few blocks from City Hall. The tallest building, the Saratoga, she was like, that's 22 stories. Why don't we use that as a benchmark? The county building is there. It's 12 stories, but it's really like around 150 feet tall. Why don't we use those as benchmarks to see what we can do where? And that's really where it was. And your second point, which kind of goes into the second question, economic development, industrial preservation, we had an industrial area focused cohort, and it was robust. Our industrial community is here, it's interested. You reach out to them, they will respond. As far as economic development, our business community is a little tougher. The institutions that are here aren't always agreeable and aren't always active. And so we're trying our best. We don't have business improvement districts yet. We do have merchants associations, chambers of commerce, but as I said, there's inconsistency in terms of their activity. But we're doing our best. And the mayor has said, you know, we are now an economic development city. We got the comp plan done. I want economic development in all forms. Figure it out. Figure it out. But the second, in the second set of questions about engaging the places of worship, we did. Our first session was actually at the Catholic Church here, and we were really excited about it. We were there, and after 10, 15 minutes, we had no one. And then finally, someone came in and said, oh, wait, oh, this is not it. I was like, so are you here for the comp plan? She was like, no, I'm here for the communion. And so we went next door to the actual church. I opened the door, and having 1,000 people simultaneously turn around dressed to the nines stare at you because it's communion day, was very humbling, because it was like, oh, no one told us that we were competing with probably the most important day in the community. And that's being at church. And so the follow-up was hard. The follow-up was hard, but it was lessons learned, and we have to find those folks specifically in the community, who are leaders, and that's how we were able to get the handful of folks. How important was increasing truly affordable housing to the community? This is interesting. I didn't grow up far from Mount Vernon. I'm a Bronx guy. And rebuilding the Bronx, affordable housing was bread and butter. And when I walked through the door, like, to my surprise and chagrin, was affordable housing doesn't bring tax revenue. Wasn't universal, But that was a lot of the dialogue, and I get it. In the lens of Westchester County, places like Mount Vernon and Port Chester and Ossining, take the brunt of affordable housing. But it's not only necessary, affordable housing is a catalyst, specifically in specific areas. So these were long, hard conversations we had, and we were able to get, a recommended set aside of affordable housing for pretty much all housing. And being a pro-housing community, it's almost required that we do that. So we are addressing that, and I was able to convince her, like, folks, there's such a thing as affordable home ownership. We're looking to increase home ownership, so not all affordable housing is bad. Not all affordable housing means lowest of low. It means there's diversity to it, and lowest of low is we need to provide housing for people. And so we did wind up addressing it. I know we're approaching 1 o'clock. Two quick questions. Many lessons learned regarding community outreach. Anything you would definitely do next time, definitely not do. Um, all over again, it was exhausting. I would definitely have 30 sessions over. Absolutely have 30 sessions over. We would not do, we would not have a 50-member advisory committee. We would pick 15 visible, dedicated leaders, work with them, and just be able to have that consistent voice because those leaders can go out in the community. And within our community outreach, we work with a lot of homeowners associations. So if we could have taken that approach and applied it to our advisory committee, it would have worked so much better. As I said, we walked through the door, and even when we changed up the makeup, we went from 50 to 46. And I was like, council members, what are you doing? It's like, we need as many voices as possible. I was like, yeah, but half these people are not going to show up. And that's a value negative. That's no. And finally, what is the process that will ensure the plan guides the zoning? Dedicated leadership. It is, even though it's like the zoning recommendations and such, and the policies are not set in stone, it has been adopted by city council. There was legislation. It is adopted legislation. So not only has it been adopted, and so there could be a legal challenge based on that. You have city council and the mayor that's dedicated to doing it that way. And even though we just changed two city council members, both city council members personally told me, like, let's get this done. Let's make this happen. Let's do it based on the plan and try to do it the right way. Is it going to look exactly the same? No. But that's part of doing the zoning ordinance RFP process is we're going to do another set of outreach. We're going to have the full GAIS process to make sure that we have all our bases covered. Sorry, it's 101.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, James. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Robin, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. I just want to note that there is a brief post-webinar survey. So if you have a second, if you could fill it out, it is always very helpful for us for guiding future events. There's also a link in the chat for the AICP credit if that's something you're looking for. Just want to note again, thanks to the Tappan Zee section of the Metro New York chapter of the APA. And that is it for today. Thank you all. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks,
Okay.
everyone.